The message came in at 11:52 at night. I wasn't supposed to see it. That's the part that still strikes me, even now, sitting here on the other side of everything that happened. If Leo hadn't woken up crying, if I hadn't come back downstairs for his pacifier, if Serena had remembered to turn her second phone face down the way she usually did, none of what followed would have unfolded the way it did. But Leo cried, and I came downstairs, and the screen was lit. I read the message once. Then I sat down and read it again. How's our baby doing tonight? I want you to understand what that sentence felt like at 11:52 on a Tuesday night, in the kitchen of the house my son had spent 4 years working himself half to death to pay for. I want you to understand what it felt like to be holding a 6-month-old child. A child I had been babysitting 3 nights a week for the past 2 months, while my daughter-in-law attended what she called late client dinners, and to read those 5 words from a man whose name I already knew. Marcus Tilden, her supervisor at Whitmore Capital. A man I had met exactly twice. A man who had looked through me both times the way people look through windows. I put the phone back down, exactly where I found it. I went upstairs. I fed Leo his bottle. I rocked him until his breathing slowed and his small hands uncurled, and he fell back into whatever peaceful country babies retreat to when the world is too much. Then, I went back downstairs. I sat in the dark, and I began to think with the kind of clarity that only arrives when every illusion you've been quietly tolerating finally burns away at once. I had been watching Serena for 4 months by that point, not following her, not searching her things, just watching. The way a man watches weather when he's spent enough years outside to know what certain skies mean, before the storm announces itself. The late returns. The new perfume worn only on travel weeks. The way she had stopped asking Dominic questions and started deflecting his instead. She was not reckless. That's what made her dangerous. She was methodical. She had constructed something, carefully, over time, and she believed it was invisible. She had made one mistake. She had looked at the quiet, slightly forgetful father-in-law who drove a 12-year-old Buick and forgot where he put his reading glasses, and she had decided he was furniture, present, harmless, beneath consideration. I reached under my workbench in the garage and opened the locked drawer. Inside was a phone that only 4 people in the world had the number to. I dialed the second contact on the list. He answered on the first ring. "I need 46 minutes of your time," I said, "starting tomorrow morning." A brief pause, then, "I'll clear my schedule." I went back inside. I finished my cold coffee. I turned off the kitchen light. And if you've ever sat in the dark and felt that specific, terrible calm that comes when you finally stop waiting and start deciding, then you already know what kind of night that was. This is going to be a long story. It's going to go places you don't expect. And I'm going to need you with me for all of it. So right now, before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. If someone in your life has ever mistaken your patience for weakness, hit that like button, because you already understand what I was feeling in that kitchen. Subscribe to Roman's Revenge Stories and turn on notifications, because what comes next is the part most people never see. What a quiet man does when he finally decides he has been quiet long enough. My son Dominic is 36 years old and carries the specific exhaustion of a man who loves more than he is loved in return. I recognized it the way you recognize something you once wore yourself, not with pity, but with the quiet ache of someone who knows exactly how heavy that particular coat gets over time. Dominic had married Serena 4 years ago in a ceremony I sat through in the second row, in the quiet suit he had picked out for me, saying nothing. Because a father who speaks too soon doesn't get thanked for his honesty, he gets blamed for the outcome. So I waited. In the first year, Serena was the kind of charming that belongs to people who want something. She brought pastries from the expensive bakery on 5th. She called me Roman. She asked questions about my life, with what sounded like genuine curiosity, and probably was. For a while. But then Leo was born, and something shifted. Not dramatically. Never dramatically with people like Serena. It was a degree at a time. The pastries stopped. The questions stopped. The way she referenced me in conversation changed from Roman to your father, always with a slight downward pull, the way you'd mention a piece of furniture that had been in the family too long to replace, but didn't quite fit the room anymore. She was not cruel. Cruelty would have been easier to name. She was dismissive, and dismissal delivered with a pleasant smile, is the most sophisticated weapon available to a certain kind of person, because it offers the target no surface to push back against. Dominic could not see any of it. He was too close. He was working 60-hour weeks at the architectural firm, leaving before Leo woke up, returning after Leo was already asleep, building a life with the desperate, methodical energy of a man who suspects that if he stops moving, everything will collapse. He was right to be afraid. He was just afraid of the wrong thing. 3 weeks before the night of the text, Dominic sat across from me at this same kitchen table and told me they were in financial trouble, that Serena's salary had been restructured, that the winter medical bills had stacked up, that he was thinking about weekend consulting work to cover the gap. He looked at me with the careful pride of a man who would rather drown quietly than ask for a hand. "I could lend you something," I said, making my voice sound appropriately uncertain. "I don't have much set aside, but—" "No, Dad," he shook his head immediately. "I'm not taking your pension money." I nodded. I let it go. What I did not tell him was that I already knew exactly where the money was disappearing. I had seen the hotel charges. I had tracked the patterns. Dominic's salary was not funding a family's future. It was funding Serena's exit strategy, one carefully concealed transaction at a time. And here is what I need you to ask yourself right now. Have you ever watched someone you love being slowly drained by a person who had already decided to leave? Did you speak up? Did you stay silent? Tell me in the comments, because I promise you, you are not alone in that answer. The man I had called that night, Garrett, had been my attorney for 22 years. By morning, he had given me everything I needed to begin. Garrett called me at 6 a.m. on Wednesday morning. I was already awake. I had the encrypted phone on the table beside my coffee, and when it buzzed, I picked it up before the first ring finished. "She has a secondary account," he said, without preamble. "Opened 14 months ago. Deposits are irregular but deliberate. Some routed through a freelance consulting entity registered in Delaware. Some transferred directly from a personal account belonging to a Marcus A. Tilden." I set my coffee cup down very carefully. "How much?" I asked. He told me. The number was not enormous, but it was specific, and specific means intentional. This was not the reckless spending of a woman living beyond her means. This was construction. Serena was not simply having an affair. She was building a destination, brick by brick, transfer by transfer, and she had been building it for over a year before I found that text message. "One more thing," Garrett added. "The Delaware entity filed an amendment last month. It lists a co-owner." I already knew the name before he said it. Marcus Tilden. I thanked him. I ended the call. I walked out to my garage and stood among the tools and the silence for a long moment. The kind of silence that isn't empty but full. The way a room feels full when something significant has just been confirmed. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment. It was not rage. Rage is loud and imprecise, and it makes you sloppy. What I felt was something colder and more useful. The specific, clarifying sensation of a man who has just seen the entire map of a battlefield for the first time and understands exactly where every piece needs to go. Serena had been meticulous. I had to be more so. The following Tuesday, I drove to Whitmore Capital. I took my 12-year-old Buick. I wore my faded green windbreaker and my reading glasses on the cord around my neck. I shuffled to the reception desk and asked for Marcus Tilden. I said I was Serena's father-in-law and that I had a small gift, a token of appreciation for how well he had supported her professional growth. The receptionist smiled warmly and told me Mr. Tilden was unavailable. She offered to pass along the package. I thanked her. I placed a bottle of unremarkable gas station wine on the counter and turned to leave. What I left with was worth considerably more than what I brought. The lobby security cameras, I counted 4. The badge scanner log at the entrance. The man in the gray blazer sitting in the waiting area with no coffee and no briefcase, watching his phone without looking at it. That man was on Garrett's payroll. By 4 p.m., we had a complete record of every time Marcus Tilden had badged in and out of that building over the past 6 months, cross-referenced with Serena's travel calendar and 3 hotel booking platforms. The picture was not ambiguous. I also made a second call that afternoon to a woman named Patricia Cole, the finest family law litigator in the state for 30 years before she retired. A woman who owed me a favor that had been sitting uncollected for a long time. She answered on the second ring. How complicated? She asked. Complicated enough to be interesting, I said. She told me she'd clear her week. Now I need to ask you something. Because this is the part of the story where most people would have moved. Most people would have confronted someone, or called their son, or done something loud and immediate to relieve the pressure building inside them. But I didn't, and I want to know, could you have waited? If you had that information, if you held that entire map in your hands, could you have stayed quiet and patient and kept playing the role of the harmless old man? Tell me honestly in the comments. Because what I did next required something most people underestimate. Not strength, not money, not connections. Just patience. The willingness to let people believe they have already won, right up until the moment they discover they haven't. I went home. I made dinner. I watched the evening news. And I waited for Serena to make the move I knew was coming. Serena organized a dinner 10 days after I found the text. She called it a family dinner, a phrase she deployed with surgical precision, always when she needed to control the emotional temperature of a room. She invited her parents, Thomas and Vivian. She cooked an elaborate meal that Dominic would later describe as the best she had made in years. She lit candles. She opened good wine. She created, with practiced effortlessness, the atmosphere of a family that was thriving. I sat at the far end of the table in my usual spot, eating quietly, speaking only when addressed, declining the wine because of my blood pressure medication. Thomas was the kind of man who had made his money in commercial real estate and spent the rest of his life ensuring that everyone in his vicinity understood this fact. He spoke with the loud, authoritative confidence of someone who had never been genuinely challenged in a social setting, because the people around him had always had more to lose from the confrontation than he did. He had never liked me. I had sensed it from our first meeting. Not hostility exactly, something more dismissive than that. I was a category to him, retired working class, peripheral, the kind of man you include at the table because your son married his son, not because you have any genuine interest in what he might have to say, which is precisely where I needed him. Halfway through the main course, Thomas set down his fork and addressed the table on the subject of the current labor market. Too much leverage in the hands of workers. No discipline. Contractors pricing themselves out of relevance. The working class holding the corporate class hostage. He turned to me at the end of it, not because he wanted my answer, but because asking and then dismissing is a specific form of dominance that people like Thomas practice without even realizing it. What do you think, Roman? I set down my fork. I let a beat pass, the appropriate beat of a man who needs a moment to gather his thoughts. I think, I said slowly, that the contractor pricing issue has less to do with labor discipline and more to do with the materials backlog. Lumber futures haven't corrected since the rate hikes. Contractors are pricing risk into their bids, not padding margins. The corporate squeeze is coming from the supply side, not the labor side. I paused, but I mostly just listened to the radio while I putter around the house. I could be wrong. The table went quiet. Thomas stared at me with the expression of a man whose furniture has just spoken in full sentences. Vivian looked at her plate. Dominic blinked. And Serena looked at me for exactly 1 second before she looked away. But in that 1 second, I saw something I had not seen from her before. Not fear, not quite. Something more precise than fear. Recognition. The dawning, unwanted awareness that the man she had categorized so confidently might require a second look. She recovered immediately. The smile returned. The conversation moved on. But that second had happened, and we both knew it. After dinner, while Dominic and Thomas talked in the living room, Serena found me in the kitchen doing dishes. She stood in the doorway with her wine glass and studied me with the expression of someone working through a problem they can't yet name. "You're sharper than you let on," she said, lightly, almost warmly, as though it were a compliment. I smiled at the sink. "Old age teaches you to stop performing," I said. "You say what you actually think, and let people decide what to do with it." Very freeing, honestly. She watched me for another moment, then she smiled, that smooth surface smile, and returned to her guests. I finished the dishes. I dried my hands, and I thought about how the most dangerous moment in any operation is the one where the other side almost sees you clearly, and then decides they were wrong to look. Serena had looked, and then she had decided I wasn't worth the concern. That decision was going to cost her everything. Have you ever been in a room where someone underestimated you so completely that you had to work to keep a straight face? Where you sat quietly and let them perform their confidence, knowing something they didn't? I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments right now, because I promise you, what happens at this dinner table is nothing compared to what Serena was about to set in motion. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story, because the next chapter is where everything begins to fall into place. Serena filed for divorce on a Tuesday. She did it through her attorney, a sharp, aggressive litigator named Holloway who specialized in high-conflict dissolutions and had built his entire reputation on making opposing parties feel overmatched before the first word was spoken. The papers were served to Dominic at his office, not slipped under a door, not mailed to the house, handed to him by a process server who walked past his receptionist through his open office door and placed them on his desk in front of his project team at 11:30 in the morning. It was not an accident. The humiliation was architectural. Dominic called me from a parking garage 20 minutes later. His voice had the particular quality of a man who has just received a diagnosis he suspected was coming, but had no idea would arrive today, in this form, in front of those specific people. I told him to come to my house after work. I told him not to call Serena. I told him not to discuss it with anyone at the firm. I told him to drive carefully. He arrived at 7 p.m. with the papers under his arm, and a look in his eyes I had hoped I would never have to see in my son's face. The look of a man whose internal architecture has just been condemned. He sat at my kitchen table and walked me through the demands. Primary custody of Leo, the house transferred entirely into Serena's name, spousal support, and buried on page 7, a property transfer agreement that Serena's team had drafted separately and was now pressuring Dominic to sign immediately. Her attorney had framed it as protecting Leo's housing stability, given Dominic's, quote, uncertain financial position, end quote. Dominic looked at me across the table. Dad, I can't fight this. Holloway's firm is the most aggressive in the city. I don't have the resources for a war. You don't need resources, I said. You need the right person. I picked up the encrypted phone. Patricia Cole answered on the second ring. I explained the situation in 3 sentences. She told me she would clear her schedule for the week. I thanked her and ended the call. Dominic stared at me. Who is she? Someone who has been waiting for the right case, I said. What I did not tell him was that the property transfer document Serena's team had so carefully drafted contained a specific tripwire, a clause embedded on page 4 that their attorneys had written themselves, without understanding what they had written, because they had drafted it assuming the man on the other side of the table was exactly what he appeared to be, a retired mechanic's father with no leverage, no resources, and no options beyond accepting whatever terms were placed in front of him. They had not drafted it for Roman. Garrett had spent 48 hours reviewing every line of that document. He had found the leverage point the way a structural engineer finds a fault line, quietly, precisely, without announcing it. The indemnification clause in Section 4 stated clearly that the property transfer would be rendered entirely void if the transferring party had initiated any undisclosed financial instruments against the other party's assets prior to signing. Serena had done exactly that. 14 months of documented transfers. The Delaware entity. The co-ownership with Marcus Tilden. Every wire. Every deposit. Every amendment. All of it sitting in Garrett's files. Organized by date, cross-referenced, court-ready. She had built the trap herself. We were simply going to walk her into it. I told Dominic to go home. I told him to sleep. I told him not to sign a single page of anything until Patricia Cole had reviewed every word. He stood at my front door for a moment before leaving, looking at me with an expression I recognized. The look of a man who is too exhausted to ask all the questions forming behind his eyes, and is choosing instead to trust the one person who has never given him a reason not to. I don't understand what's happening, he said quietly, but I believe you. That's enough for now, I told him. I closed the door. I walked back to my kitchen table. I sat down in the dark the same way I had sat down the night I found the text, and I felt that same cold, clarifying calm settle into the center of my chest. Serena believed she was 3 signatures away from walking out of my son's life with everything she had come for. She had no idea she had already signed her own confession. Now, let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments. Have you ever watched someone build what they thought was a foolproof plan, completely unaware that they were constructing their own collapse? Because what Serena did next, the move she made in the days before the mediation, is the move that every overconfident person makes when they believe the game is already over. She stopped being careful, and that is always when the walls come down. The mediation was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday. I was awake at 4:30. Not because I couldn't sleep, I had slept well. The deep, untroubled sleep of a man who has done everything that can be done and is simply waiting for the moment to arrive. I was awake at 4:30 because I wanted the silence of that hour, the specific quality of darkness that exists just before the city remembers itself. I sat in my home office with black coffee and the documents I had been assembling for 6 weeks, organized, categorized, cross-referenced, and arranged in the precise order that Patricia Cole and I had agreed upon during our final preparation call the night before. The DNA report was on top. I had known its contents for 3 weeks. I had carried that knowledge the way you carry something fragile through a crowded room, carefully, deliberately, never setting it down in the wrong place. The private genetics laboratory had delivered the results in a sealed envelope that I had opened alone, at this same desk, on a Tuesday evening, while Dominic was upstairs giving Leo a bath. The result was unambiguous. Dominic was not Leo's biological father. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I need you to understand the weight of it. Not the legal implications, not the strategic value. The simple, devastating human weight of a young man upstairs giving a bath to a child he believed was his, singing some half-remembered song, probably splashing water on the bathroom floor, while his father sat downstairs holding the document that would eventually rewrite everything he understood about the last 18 months of his life. I had not told him, not yet. The timing of a revelation like that is everything. Too soon, and it becomes a weapon that wounds indiscriminately. At the right moment, in the right room, with the right people present, it becomes something else entirely. I went to my closet. I passed the flannel shirts. I passed the faded green windbreaker. In the back, in a garment bag I had not opened in 14 months, was a suit I had purchased in Milan a long time ago, dark charcoal, precisely cut, the kind of suit that doesn't announce itself but changes the quality of the air in a room the moment you walk in wearing it. I dressed carefully, brushed silver cufflinks, nothing ostentatious. I stood in front of the mirror for a long moment and looked at the man looking back at me. The performance was over. I picked up Dominic at 9 a.m. He was wearing his best suit, a good suit, genuinely, but anxiety had colonized his posture and undermined it completely. He sat in the passenger seat, with the divorce papers on his lap, and the expression of a man riding towards something he has already decided he cannot survive. "Talk to me," I said. "I keep thinking about Leo," he said. "Whatever happens in that room today, I can't lose him, Dad. Everything else she can have, I just can't lose him." I kept my eyes on the road. "You're not going to lose him," I said. Patricia Cole met us in the lobby of the mediating firm, compact, unhurried, with the particular stillness of a woman who has sat in 100 rooms like this one and left most of them having one. She shook Dominic's hand, then mine. Her eyes registered something when she looked at me, a quiet recalibration, the way people recalibrate when reality doesn't match the picture they were given. "You look different than I expected," she said. "I'm told that sometimes," I replied. We rode the elevator to the 12th floor. The doors opened into a reception area designed to communicate, without saying a word, that the people who belonged here were a very specific kind of people, and that uncertainty about whether you were one of them was itself the answer. Serena was already in the conference room. White blazer, hair perfect, posture radiating the calm confidence of a woman who considers the outcome already determined. Her attorney Holloway sat beside her, tall, 50s, the practiced ease of a man who charges $400 an hour and has never once doubted that he was worth it. He looked at Patricia Cole. His expression shifted, barely, almost imperceptibly, by exactly 2 degrees. He recognized her. He looked at me. His expression did not shift at all. Good. Have you ever walked into a room knowing something that nobody else in that room knew yet? That specific feeling, outwardly calm, inwardly absolutely certain, of carrying the outcome in your pocket while everyone around you is still debating the possibilities? Tell me in the comments. Share this video right now with someone who needs to see what happens when the quiet ones finally speak, because the next chapter is the one this entire story has been building toward, and I promise you, nothing in that conference room goes the way Serena planned. The conference room was exactly what it was designed to be. A long slab of polished mahogany, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the financial district, a view that existed not for the pleasure of the people inside, but to remind them, constantly, of the scale of the world they were operating in, and the smallness of whatever personal problem had brought them to this table. Ergonomic leather chairs, a crystal water pitcher at the center. The quiet, climate-controlled hum of a space that had witnessed 100 financial executions and remembered none of them. Holloway opened without preamble. "My client is seeking a swift, uncontested dissolution," he said, his voice carrying the measured authority of a man who has delivered this particular speech so many times it has become muscle memory. "We are not here to negotiate terms. We are here to present the baseline requirements for your client to exit this marriage without facing a protracted and deeply public trial in family court." He slid a bound document across the table. "Primary custody of Leo, Dominic to receive supervised visitation on alternating weekends. Full ownership of the marital residence, referencing the property transfer agreement. $5,000 per month in combined spousal and child support, effective immediately. And the full absorption of what Holloway described as Dominic's outstanding personal debt. The credit accounts, the second mortgage balance, all of it placed squarely on Dominic's shoulders." Serena looked at Dominic across the table with an expression of practiced, performative regret. The expression of a woman who wants the room to understand that this is painful for her too, that she is not a villain, that she is simply a woman protecting her child from a financially unstable husband. It was an extraordinary performance. I had to admire the craftsmanship. Dominic gripped the edge of the table. I felt it beside me, the physical tension of a man swallowing everything he wanted to say. He looked at me once. I gave the slightest shake of my head. He stayed silent. Patricia Cole opened her folder. She did not reach for Holloway's document. She placed a single sheet of paper in the center of the table instead. "Before we discuss your client's demands," Patricia said, pleasantly, conversationally, the way a surgeon discusses the weather before making the first incision, "I'd like to draw everyone's attention to page 4 of the property transfer agreement your client's team drafted. Section 7, paragraph 3. Holloway frowned. He reached for his copy. I watched Serena's eyes move to the document, then slowly, involuntarily, to me. "The indemnification clause," Patricia continued, "states clearly that this transfer is rendered immediately and permanently void if the transferring party, your client, had initiated any undisclosed financial instruments against the respondent's assets prior to the date of signing." Holloway read the paragraph. He read it again. The color began a slow, quiet retreat from his face. "This is standard boilerplate," he said, but the authority was already leaving his voice, the way air leaves a room when a window is opened unexpectedly. "It is standard language," Patricia agreed pleasantly, "which is precisely why your team included it without reading it carefully enough." She placed the financial records on the table, organized by date, by account, by transfer amount. These are 14 months of documented transactions. A secondary account opened in Serena's name, a Delaware consulting entity, co-owned with Marcus Tilden, wire transfers from Tilden's personal account, all of it initiated while the marital property was jointly held, all of it undisclosed. Holloway stared at the documents. The room had gone very quiet. I leaned forward, just slightly, just enough. "Serena," I said, quietly, "the way you say someone's name when you want them to understand that the conversation they thought they were having has just become a completely different conversation. I found the text the night you were in Portland. I found the account in Delaware. I know about Marcus." She looked at me. The white blazer, the perfect hair, the practiced composure, all of it still in place, but behind her eyes, something had shifted. The specific, terrible shift of a person who has just understood that the ground they were standing on was never as solid as they believed. I placed the DNA report in the center of the table. "I also had Leo's DNA tested 8 weeks ago," I said. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever sat inside. Dominic picked up the report. He read it slowly. He set it back down. He looked at nothing for a long moment, at the middle distance, at some internal landscape the rest of us couldn't see. Then he looked at Serena with an expression I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Not rage, not tears, just the vast, hollow devastation of a man watching the last version of a story he had believed in completely collapse into something unrecognizable. Was any of it real? He asked. His voice barely reached across the table. Serena opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at Holloway. Holloway was already closing his portfolio. And I want to ask you something in this moment, because I think you need to sit with this question before we go any further. If you were Dominic in that chair, holding that report, what would you have done? Could you have stayed as quiet as he did? Could you have held yourself together in that room, in front of those people, with that information in your hands? Tell me in the comments right now. Because what Dominic does next, the words he chooses, the way he stands up from that table, is the moment this entire story has been building toward. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And stay with me, because we are not finished yet. Holloway spoke first. Not to Dominic, not to Patricia Cole. He turned to Serena, and he spoke in the low, clipped tone of a man who has just discovered that the foundation he was hired to build on was never foundation at all. It was stage set, and the whole thing is coming down around him. You need to understand what this document means for your position, he said quietly. It's fabricated, Serena said. Her voice was still steady, but it was the specific steadiness of someone gripping something very tightly to stop their hands from shaking. He paid someone to produce a false result. He has never liked me. He has spent 4 years looking for a way to destroy this marriage because he never believed I was good enough for his son. She turned to Dominic. The composure was still there. Extraordinary, really, the architecture of it. But underneath, visible now to everyone in the room, was the frantic energy of a woman recalculating in real time. Dominic, listen to me. You know me. You know who I am. This is exactly what he wants. To turn you against me. To take Leo from both of us. To win whatever private war he's been fighting since the day we got married. Don't let him do this. Please. Dominic looked at her for a long time. The room held its breath. Then he looked down at the DNA report still sitting on the table in front of him. He placed one hand flat on top of it, not picking it up, just resting his hand on it, and he exhaled slowly, the way a man exhales when he is releasing something he has been carrying without knowing it. The report is from a certified laboratory with chain of custody documentation, Patricia Cole said, her voice calm, factual, entirely without cruelty. We submitted a duplicate copy directly to the presiding family court judge yesterday morning. It is already part of the court record. Serena's eyes moved to Patricia. Something shifted in them, the recalculation completing itself, arriving at a number she had not prepared for. Furthermore, Patricia continued, opening to the next section of her binder, the paternity finding legally nullifies your client's claim for child support from the respondent. The Delaware entity documentation, the transfer records, and the wire transaction history constitute prima facie evidence of financial fraud against the marital estate. We are prepared to refer all of this to the District Attorney's Office for criminal review. Identity theft, wire fraud, both carry mandatory sentencing provisions under federal statute. Holloway closed his portfolio completely. He placed both hands flat on the table, a gesture that meant, in the language of men who have sat in rooms like this for 30 years, that he was done. I need to speak with my client privately, he said. Of course, Patricia replied. Dominic and I stepped into the hallway with Patricia, while Serena and Holloway remained behind the closed mahogany doors. We stood near the window at the end of the corridor. Below us, the city moved. Ordinary, indifferent, entirely unaware that on the 12th floor of this building, a woman's carefully constructed future was being reduced to rubble. Dominic stood, with his hands in his pockets, looking at the street below. How long have you known? He asked. Not accusing, just asking, the way you ask a question when you need the answer, but are not entirely sure you are ready for it. About the affair, 4 months, I said. About Leo, 3 weeks. He nodded slowly. He kept looking at the street. Why didn't you tell me? And because the moment you knew, you would have confronted her. And the moment you confronted her, she would have lawyered up with everything already in place. and you would have walked into that mediation with nothing but your anger and her infrastructure. He was quiet for a moment. So you waited. I waited. He turned to look at me then, and in his face I saw something I had not seen there in a very long time. Not the exhausted, load-bearing expression of a man trying to hold everything together through sheer force of effort. Something quieter than that. Something that had been buried under 4 years of 60-hour weeks and designer grocery bills, and the relentless, grinding work of loving someone who had already decided to leave. The doors opened behind us. Holloway stepped out. He did not look at Dominic. He looked at Patricia Cole. "My client would like to discuss a revised arrangement," he said. Patricia looked at me once. A brief, professional glance that contained within it the entire shared understanding of two people who have prepared for exactly this moment. "Of course," she said, "but the financial fraud documentation goes to the district attorney regardless of any civil settlement. That is not a negotiating point." Holloway absorbed this. He nodded once and stepped back through the doors. We returned to the conference room. Serena was sitting differently now. The white blazer was the same. The hair was the same. But the posture had changed in the way a building's posture changes after a structural element gives way. Still standing, technically, but nothing like it was before. She looked at Dominic when he sat down across from her. And for the first time since I had known this woman, the performance was entirely gone. What was underneath it was not what I expected. It was not defiance. It was not calculation. It was just a person, frightened and exposed and entirely out of moves. "I'm sorry," she said. The words were quiet, and they were real. The first real thing she had said in that room. Perhaps the first real thing she had said in a very long time. Dominic looked at her, a long, steady look that contained within it everything that needed to be said and had already been said by the simple fact of this morning, this room, this table between them. "I know," he said finally. Then he looked at Patricia Cole. "Let's finish this," he said. "And I want you to sit with that for a moment." The way Dominic said those 3 words. Not with rage, not with satisfaction. With the flat, clear resolution of a man who has just finished grieving something while it was still in the room with him and is now simply ready to begin. Have you ever had to let something go while it was still sitting right in front of you? Tell me in the comments. Because what happens after you leave a room like that, what you rebuild, what you discover about yourself in the months that follow, is what the final chapter of this story is really about. The legal proceedings took 4 months. Not because the case was complicated. Patricia Cole had constructed an argument so airtight, so comprehensively documented, that Serena's subsequent legal team, Holloway, had withdrawn the morning after the mediation, citing an irreconcilable conflict of interest, spent most of those 4 months attempting to negotiate a damage settlement rather than contest the underlying facts. Because the underlying facts were not contestable. They were receipts, wire records, laboratory certifications, and a Delaware corporate filing with Serena's own signature on the amendment page. The criminal referral went to the district attorney as promised. Serena was indicted on 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of financial fraud against a marital estate. She accepted a plea arrangement that included restitution, a suspended sentence contingent on compliance, and a permanent financial disclosure requirement that would follow her professional record for the next decade. She did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that because stories like this one are sometimes told as though justice arrives in the form of a cell door closing, and that is rarely how it actually works. What Serena received was something less dramatic and in certain ways more lasting. The permanent, documented reality of what she had done, attached to her name in every professional and legal context for the foreseeable future. Marcus Tilden resigned from Whitmore Capital 6 weeks after the mediation. The board's decision was not announced publicly, but the sequence was not difficult to follow for anyone paying attention. The financial misconduct review that Garrett had quietly initiated, routed through 2 compliance contacts whose relationship to Roman Freight Solutions was a matter of public corporate record, had anyone thought to look, had surfaced the Delaware entity co-ownership at the worst possible moment for a man whose entire professional identity rested on the perception of unimpeachable judgment. He left the city shortly afterward. I have not tracked where he went. I have no interest in where he went. The custody determination regarding Leo took the longest. This was the part I had thought about most carefully in the months of planning. more carefully than the financial documentation, more carefully than the property clause, more carefully than any of the corporate mechanics that had occupied so much of my preparation. Because Leo was the only person in this entire situation who had made no choices, who had exercised no judgment, who had simply arrived in the world and found himself in the middle of something he had no vocabulary for. Dominic was not Leo's biological father. That was a biological fact, immovable and plain. But Dominic had been in that house at 3 a.m. during every ear infection. He had learned, through trial and exhausted error, exactly how Leo needed to be held during a fever, slightly elevated, left side, with one hand flat between his shoulder blades. He had read the same 4 board books so many times he could recite them in his sleep, and sometimes did. He had chosen, every single day, to be present in the specific and unglamorous ways that presence actually requires. Biology is a fact. Fatherhood is a decision made at 3 a.m. Patricia Cole argued the de facto parentage claim with the precision and conviction of a woman who believed in it personally, not just professionally. The judge agreed. Leo remained with Dominic. A formal visitation arrangement was established for Serena, contingent on the ongoing compliance requirements of her plea agreement. Leo stayed. That was what mattered. That was, from the very beginning, what had always mattered most. In the months that followed, I watched my son rebuild. It was not a dramatic process. It did not happen in a single moment of clarity or a montage of triumphant decisions. It happened the way real rebuilding always happens, incrementally, quietly, in the accumulated weight of ordinary mornings. Dominic reduced his hours at the firm. He was home when Leo woke up. He learned to cook 4 things well instead of ordering delivery 3 nights a week. He started sleeping without the brittle, surface-level unconsciousness of a man braced for the next emergency. He looked, for the first time in years, like someone who was living his actual life rather than managing the performance of one. 3 months after the proceedings concluded, Dominic sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where he had arrived with the divorce papers, the same table where I had sat in the dark with a cold cup of coffee and a lit phone screen that changed everything. And he said something I have thought about many times since. "I used to think you were the simplest person I knew," he said. "I mean that as a confession, not a complaint. I looked at your life and I thought, old truck, small house, same 3 shirts. I thought simplicity was all there was." I didn't say anything. I let him continue. "I understand now that you were just very selective about what you allowed people to see." He looked at me across the table. "How long did it take you to learn that?" I thought about it honestly. "A long time," I said. "And it cost more than I'd like to admit." He nodded. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the strategy. Not for the lawyers or the documents or any of it. For not telling me until I was in the room. For letting me be there for the ending." I looked at my son, the broader shoulders, the quieter eyes, the particular solidity of a man who has walked through something genuinely difficult and come out the other side knowing what he's made of. "You were always going to be there for the ending," I said. "I just made sure the ending was yours." Leo was upstairs. I could hear him through the ceiling. That specific toddler monologue that happens in the last 20 minutes before sleep, claims them half narration and half negotiation with the dark. Dominic tilted his head up toward the sound and smiled. The involuntary, unguarded smile of a father, uncomplicated and complete. We sat in the quiet for a while after that. The kitchen, the coffee, the sound of a child talking himself to sleep upstairs in a house that had almost been taken from him before he was old enough to know what a house meant. I have built a number of things in my life, some of them significant by the measures the world uses to assess significance. But sitting at that table, in that ordinary kitchen light, I understood with the clarity that only arrives at the end of something long and difficult, that the most important thing I ever built was not a company or a contract or a corporate strategy. It was this: a son who knew his own worth. A child who was safe, a table to come back to. The quietest people in the room are not the ones with nothing to say. They are the ones who have already decided what matters, and have been patient enough to protect it without ever making it about themselves. I am Roman, and I have never been anyone's stepping stone. If this story moved you, if any part of it reflected something you have lived or witnessed or carried quietly, without anyone knowing, I want to hear from you in the comments right now. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Tell me if you have ever had to protect someone without them knowing you were doing it. Tell me if you have ever been the quiet one in the room that nobody thought to take seriously. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that patience is not weakness, that silence is not surrender, that the most powerful thing a person can do is know their own worth and protect it without apology. Subscribe to Roman's Revenge Stories. Turn on notifications, because we have more stories to tell, and every single one of them begins the same way, with a quiet person and a decision that everyone else missed.